Hi everyone, it's Mr. Kwan here. Today we're going to talk about quadratic functions. Now so far in this class, really the only type of function that we've dealt with in depth is the linear function. So it's exciting that we're going to get to learn about a new type of function. A quadratic function is of the form f of x equals ax squared plus bx plus c, where a, b, and c are all real numbers. And this that we're looking at is said to be in standard form. Now there are other forms that we deal with, and one of them is factored form. So it's going to look like that. And then the last form is vertex form. And each of these three forms have different advantages and disadvantages. So let me quickly go over what each one is useful for. Standard form is usually nice to see what the y-intercept is. And the reason that we can do that is because in order to find the y-intercept or vertical intercept, basically we're just plugging in 0 into our function. And so if we plug in 0 for x here and here, what we're going to be left with is just whatever the c value is. So the y-intercept or the vertical intercept, whatever you'd like to call it, or the f-intercept, is just going to be the point 0, comma c, and c is just this number right there. Standard form is also nice because it allows us to nicely utilize the quadratic formula. And we haven't talked about what that is yet, but we will see that utilized later in this video. Factored form is nice because it allows us to easily see the x-intercepts. And the x-intercepts are just going to be p comma 0 and q comma 0. And p and q are just whatever these numbers are right here. And then lastly, the vertex form easily allows us to see what the vertex is. And again, we haven't discussed what the vertex is, but when we talk about it, it's just going to be the point h comma k. Okay, so one thing that becomes very important is when we're dealing with quadratic equations is being able to solve them. So earlier in the quarter, I had you solving quadratic equations using a graphing utility like Desmos, but now we're going to be able to learn how to solve quadratic equations in a few different ways. So the first way that we might be dealing with is called factoring. And factoring in the context of quadratic functions is the process of getting a quadratic function into factored form. And this helps us solve the equation because of something called the zero product property, which says that if the product of two numbers is 0, then one or both of those numbers must be 0. So let me just kind of write out further what that looks like. So if I have a times b equals 0, the zero product property says that either a equals 0 or b equals 0 or both a equals 0 and b equals 0. I'll show you why in a minute that is helpful for us. So let's solve this first example. It says solve the equation 3x squared minus 8x equals 3x plus 4. And we're going to do this by factoring. However, first we need to get everything on one side. And so I'm going to subtract 3x and 4 from both sides. So if I do that, then on the left-hand side we'll have 3x squared minus 11x minus 4 equals 0. So the reason that we moved everything over to one side of the equation is so that now our equation is equal to 0, and eventually once we factor it, we're going to be able to use the zero product property. So let us continue to try to factor this. Now, I actually learned this method from a friend, and she calls it the Xbox method, but there are so many different ways that you can factor, and you have likely seen one of those methods before. So if you have a different way of factoring and you are comfortable with it, please feel free to utilize that method. Okay? And the reason it's called the Xbox method is because first we're going to make an X, and the number that goes on the top is the B value. So remember, this looks like ax squared plus bx plus c. And so our b value is negative 11. It's just the coefficient or the number in front of x. And then the number that we're going to put down here is whatever a times c is. So in this case, our a is 3, and our c value is negative 4. So I'm going to multiply those two numbers together. 3 times negative 4 is negative 12. Now, what I want to do is I want to try to find two numbers that add to the top value and multiply to the bottom value. So two numbers that add to negative 11 and multiply to negative 12, and those numbers will be negative 12 and positive 1. Okay, and so what that allows us to do is it allows us to rewrite our equation that we had. So initially we had 3x squared minus 11x minus 4 equals 0. But now I'm going to rewrite this middle term. So the first and the last term are going to stay the same. So I have 3x squared, and at the end I have minus 4 equals 0. However, I'm going to break up the middle term using these two numbers as our new coefficients. So I'm going to have minus 12x plus just x, because the coefficient of that would be 1, and then minus 4 equals 0. Now remember that I called this the X box method, and so now what I'm going to do is I am going to create a box. And within that box, I'm going to break it up into 4 compartments. And in the top left corner, we're always going to put our x squared term. And then in the bottom right corner, we're going to put our constant term. Whenever you have just a number by itself without a variable, it's called a constant. And now, the other two terms, you can put them in either of the remaining boxes. So I'm going to put negative 12x right here, and I'm going to put x right here. Now on the outsides in this position, these 4 positions right here, we want to factor out or like take out the greatest common divisor. And so in each direction, let's start in this bottom position here. What we're going to do is we're going to look across at negative 12x and negative 4, and we want to think about the greatest common divisor of both of those numbers, or the thing that we can factor out. And the thing that we can factor out of both of those terms is the number negative 4. Okay, and then up above that, we're going to do the same thing in the top row. So we have the terms 3x squared and x, and the thing that those have in common is x. Now in this next position, we're going to look in the first column, and we have 3x squared and negative 12x, and the thing that we would be able to factor out of that is it has 3x in common. And then lastly, we would look in the second column, and we would look at x and negative 4 and see what those have in common. And really, we could just factor out a 1, because that's basically what they have in common. Now, those highlighted yellow terms there are what our equation is going to factor into now. So this equation now becomes x minus 4 times 3x plus 1 equals 0. Now that we have it factored, we can use the zero product property. And what that allows us to do is each of these individual terms here, we can set those both equal to 0 and then solve for them. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Each set of inside the parentheses, I'm going to set those equal to 0. and then solve for x. And those will give us our solutions for the equation. So if I add 4 to both sides here, then I get x equals 4. And then on this one, I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides, so I get 3x equals negative 1. And then I'm going to divide both sides by 3, and I will get x equals negative 1/3. Okay, so those are our solutions for this problem. Now, I'm just going to plug in one of those just to make sure that we were doing this correctly. And so this is something that you want to do, especially if you're taking like an exam or a quiz. You want to plug in those values that you got and make sure that it makes the equation true. So I'm just going to plug in 3 times 4 squared minus 8 times 4. So I'm replacing everywhere that I see an x, I'm going to replace it with 4 since that was one of the solutions that we got. And then I'm going to simplify and see if those are equal. So maybe right now we don't know if they're equal, so I'll put a little question mark right there. So if I simplify the left-hand side, I'll get 3 times 16 minus 8 times 4 is 32. And then I'll put a question mark equals 3 times 4 is 12 plus 4. And then 3 times 16 is 48 minus 32. Is that equal to 16? And 48 minus 32 is in fact equal to 16, so I can put a little check mark there. So this works off as a solution. I will leave it up to you to verify if this is a correct solution as well.